Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. This is Water Street Projects here at the WSA building. And Water Street Projects is an interdisciplinary nonprofit creative platform with projects including performance art, music shows, culinary experiences, visual arts, and more. And it's all modeled after Cedric Price's Fun Palace. And I guess I'll hand it off to Isabel to talk about the talk and introduce Lily.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ming. So for some background on this talk, my name is Isabel, first off. I'm the senior editor at Mold Magazine, and we're hosting this book club here in accordance with the series we've been doing over at the magazine, reviewing and returning to Octavia Butler's text, Parable of the Sower. As many of you guys who are here might know, the text itself starts in 2024, July of 2024, so we're sort of commemorating that by going back to this really prescient, prophetic even text. And so we've been working with artists, designers like Lily, farmers, earth workers and such to sort of talk about Octavia and the Parable of the Sower's impact on their own practices and how they're sort of living out the world she imagines through Earthseed today. And so to give, I'm going to introduce Lily a little before she introduces herself. Lily is an industrial designer, an artist, and an amazing writer who writes with Mold quite often. And it's such a pleasure to be here and to have her here all the way from Paris. Yeah.
I mean, I was here anyhow too, so don't. Yeah, but also here for this. Thank you, Isabel. So I am an ecosystemic designer and ecofuturist, and Isabel asked me to write about these seed libraries that I've been making. And so these are tools to keep seeds in different forms. And as it related to my readings of Octavia Butler, who, especially this book, really influenced my understanding of the importance of keeping seeds individually. And the week that she asked me to write this was a really intense week for me. My father suddenly passed away, and so the piece was actually an opportunity to really talk about that, but also returning to this book that week was really helpful, but also shocking because I completely forgot that her father disappears. Sorry to spoil it if you're not there yet, but I did just spoil a little bit. But if you read what I wrote, I spoiled it already. And it doesn't really spoil it. But it started to make me think about sort of our relationship to different generations. And seeds are a really good metaphor for our relationship to the past and our relationship to the future. And so that's what I ended up writing a bit about for Mold. But yeah, so welcome to the first book club. So in Parable of the Sower, the main character, Lauren Olamina, actually, how many people have read the book? Okay, so you don't have to have read it to be able to participate. Obviously, it'll give you more insights into how to respond to questions, but a lot of these things that come up in the book are questions that we're all facing now in different ways. There's hurricanes that are bringing a lot of the questions that come into the book to the forefront. There's a lot of violence on this planet, all over this planet, that are bringing a lot of these questions to the forefront. So we're all sort of contending with this future that she's laid out. Whether or not you've read the book, I think you'll have things to be in conversation around. But just for those of you who haven't read it, she develops this sort of a religion called Earthseed, and this is a passage that talks about the naming of Earthseed. Sorry, I'm in the way of it. So she writes, "Well, today I found the name. Found it while I was weeding the back garden and thinking about the way plants seed themselves, windborne, animal-borne, water-borne, far from their parent plants. They have no ability at all to travel great distances under their own power, and yet they do travel. Even they don't have to just sit in one place and wait to be wiped out. There are islands thousands of miles from anywhere, the Hawaiian Islands, for example, and Easter Island, where plants seeded themselves and grew long before any humans arrived. Earthseed. I am Earthseed. Anyone can be. someday I think there will be lots of us, and I think we'll have to seed ourselves farther and farther from this dying place. So, yeah, these passages are interspersed throughout the book, and they go alongside the narrative. And so already the book is talking about seeds just through her. I think that religion is, that's something that different readers call it religion. Some people call it faith system or belief
blueprint
system.
for survival too, that she sort of shapes along her own way as well. Yeah,
totally. So when I first read this book, I was really drawn to the way that she was making her survival pack and what she was adding to it. And at that point, I had been researching seeds and the seed economies that were really disrupted by early COVID, where amateur gardeners and sort of home gardeners were buying up a lot of the seeds that were usually used for subsistence farming. And so there was a disruption in the seed economy. And I was thinking, well, this is wild that we weren't keeping our seeds before this, that suddenly people want seeds, but before this, most homes don't have a place where people are keeping seeds, and we're relying on these giant top-down systems to be safeguarding seeds. And without seeds, there's no food. There's nothing without seeds. Do you mind going to the next? So, does anyone know what this? Yeah. Do you want to say? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I don't mean to call on you.
Aren't they like preserving a large amount of seeds in the Arctic, and it's like in case the world sort of collapses, we'll have the stockpile of seeds?
Totally. So this is the Svalbard Vault, Seed Vault in Norway, and the project sounds really benevolent. It's safeguarding all these seeds from all over the world and making sure that they are preserved in case of flood and drought and war, anything that might befall the area where these seeds are from. But by centralizing these seeds, there's a lot of vulnerability. So one vulnerability is that this actually was flooded, and so this place that's hyper-engineered, like James Bond villain kind of aesthetic, space flooded, and so you had all these seeds that people were banking on being the future of those, that biological information. They were, a lot of them are ruined. And then also there's a question of ownership, who has access to these seeds, and are these seeds actually being used for people's well-being, or are they being used for pharmaceuticals, or how are we using these seeds to have like a collective future? And that part of the project demands scrutiny, but these are generally the projects that get really well funded, and they're funded by companies and governments, and not by, we don't get to have access to that as individuals and everyday citizens. And do you mind going to the next? This is another seed library, and this is where they keep lots of genetic information in the Kew Gardens in England. And for me, it just seems like, well, duh, they shouldn't have it. Like, why do they have all those seeds? That country has proven itself not to be the most responsible, and also, there's not a huge amount of public visibility as to how these seeds are being used. Do you mind going to the next? So this is from an Australian seed library, and they're keeping seeds that are relevant to that region. And so all over the world, you have seed banks like Vivian Sansur's seed library for Palestine, and where they're safeguarding seeds that are relevant not only to the climate, but to the culture. And so all of those things come together for me to mean that we should all be independently saving seeds that are culturally, regionally, taste-y to us, like relevant to what our needs and our interests are. And also seeds, as you grow them, evolve to your climate. So if we were to both grow a cucumber from the same mother cucumber, we both had a seed and we grew it. You grew yours in your backyard in Brooklyn, and I grew mine in my window box in Paris. The cucumber that emerged would be different, even though they have the same other plants. So there's a lot of need to be having independent and decentralized seed libraries. Do you mind going to the next? So this is a seed library that I'm working on with an agronomist in Athens, and we are gathering halophytes, which are plants that are salt tolerant, and we are gathering edible halophytes. So these are plants that grow without fresh water, without a lot of added energy, and especially in the Mediterranean countries, you don't have a huge amount of capital to invest in desalination, and also there's all these plants that are spontaneously growing that are edible. And so there's 72 types of edible sea lavender just in Greece. And I had never experienced edible sea lavender, and definitely we'll have to get creative as to how to eat it. But these are seeds that are not highly valued because they haven't been integrated into mainstream culture, but also that we haven't figured out necessarily ways to make them more palatable or interesting. But Greece has a lower barrier to entry because they eat a lot of horta, which is it's just greens. It's like dandelion greens, but it's a catch-all phrase for greens. So they're more. I say it's a little bit of a lower barrier to entry to starting to eat these plants. Do you mind going to the next? And then this is a project, these are wearable seed libraries that have enough edible seeds to start a small patch of edible plants that all are plants that go to seed quite quickly, so you can start to propagate quickly. And the idea was to break in case of an emergency. And so we all are carrying our own our own gardens with us, our own future gardens, and we'll plant them if we need to. And as I designed these, I wasn't thinking of them in a dark way, but then it did definitely, it's apocalyptic to think about, like, what would you, if you had to, what would the circumstances have to be to actually break this open and plant them. And also in the piece I wrote for Mold, I talk about how you aren't going to plant a seed unless you believe that it will fruit. And so you're not going to plant a seed if you're leaving somewhere. And you're not going to plant a seed if you don't, feel like the land is safe. You're only going to plant it if you believe in a future where someone's going to reap the harvest. Keep going. This is another one. This is with the Three Sisters, which is squash, corn, and bean. And then these are some more seeds from the seed library. That's an ongoing project in Athens. And then in the piece I wrote for Mold, this summer was the first time that I'd seen my dad plant a garden. And when I went back after he passed, we went to the garden that he was so proud of, and he had harvested his first eggplant this summer, and we ate it. He made a big pasta dish, and he was just like grinning. He was like so proud that this is something that had come from something that he had planted in just like dirt for months. And then when we went back, the garden that he had planted was like overflowing. There were tomatoes and peppers, and his neighbors have been writing to me saying that they've been eating the food from there. And I'm not going to get emotional right now, but it's very emotional. Okay, keep going. Okay, so now we can all talk. So these are some questions that I ask myself when I'm designing for a future or imagining into a future. And these are some questions that I can imagine Octavia might have asked herself as she was writing what Lauren Olamina, the main character, was packing in her go bag. And we'll show you what she put in her go bag for those of you who haven't read it. But before we do that, it'd be great if everyone could imagine answer some of these questions and imagine what they would pack and what are you packing for, and should we be preparing in that way? And so I think take 5 minutes to just think about that, and then we'll share out, and then anyone who wants to share with everybody, we'll have a few people share out in that way. Does anyone have questions? No? Can everyone see the questions? I think I'm in the way. So, over here.
I also might not have enough pencils, so if you have your own
I take like 2 more minutes to answer this, and then we'll talk amongst ourselves. Maybe you all have really long lists. And I'm wondering also, to add to this, is it something that you have on your body? Is this something that you're bringing with you on your body, or is this something, is a space? How long can the list really be? And do you have to get choosy? And like, some things have to be eliminated. So maybe 1 more minute to wrap up your list. So maybe we can share out some of the lists that people came up with. And my first question is, does anyone have anything living on their list? No one has anything living. Interesting. Okay. Oh, yes. Tell me. Water. Okay. Yeah. So you're bringing water, like, yeah. Does anyone want to share their list, like the whole list, and read it to us? Yeah. It's actually kind of nice. It means that you can like rest your voice.
Okay. I will bring batteries, water filter, like, not the one connected to the sink, but something that's like travel size, a knife, tweezers, a metal rod or a metal container, because I'm thinking of like preserving, or like if I gather, like the container can always be clean and reused, twine, and a compact mirror, because the mirror can help start fires. And then the metal rod can hold anything that has fire, and I can push it or do something, because I'm thinking about temperature and different temperature points, because the climate's going to change. So metal has a higher rate of holding temperature. And then I'll find wood or like plastic. I don't know, things will be around. So a knife can always be cutting it. And then I could use the metal rod to sharpen the knife. So these are my ideas.
This magical metal rod that we all need.
It just would help. It just would help.
Yeah, everyone needs a metal rod.
Yeah.
So is the future that you're imagining a climate?
Yeah. Like it just temperature is
Change?
just different in this point, you know?
Yeah.
That's what I think. And it's just like you have to have like things that can hold certain temperature points. You know, that's what I was
Yeah.
thinking.
Did anyone else, when they were writing their lists, think about climate as the instigator for some sort of disaster, apocalypse? I mean, so for those of you who haven't read the book, it's set in 2024, a lot of parallels to today, in the midst of a apocalypse, a downturn, and people are living in walled communities, and those who are not living within walled communities are very vulnerable to one another and to dogs and to weather and to fire. And those who are living in these walled communities are trying to survive in different forms of community, and people are experimenting and also taking advantage of their power. And it sort of exacerbates in this writing, it exacerbates the realities that exist today and the disparities that exist today and the power structures that exist today, and plays them forward. So the community that Lauren Olamina, the main character, lives in, and in the first few chapters, we're still in that community. She's part of a family. She's young. She's a teenager. And there's a bunch of different families who are all co-surviving, co-living. And they have to negotiate a lot of different things. They have to negotiate access to food. They have to negotiate safety, protecting their resources. People are sneaking in over the wall. People are getting murdered. You know, there's a lot of vulnerability. And so that's sort of the world that she's building has many different stressors. One of them is the climate. One of them is exacerbated economic inequity. Another of them is, you know, the misallocation of resources to different projects. Another is our drugs. You know, things that exist today that are. This becomes easier to read as nonfiction in some ways. Like when I'm in LA, I'm like, this looks just like Parable of the Sower. I mean, it's just very easy to understand how, if you play out some of the things that are happening today, it ends up here. So just for those of you who read the book, that was like a very rushed synopsis of everything, because it's very complicated and beautiful, and everyone should read it because it'll sit with you and it'll change you and it'll make you want to make something in response. But is there anything that someone would want to add to that really brief synopsis that I might have missed in terms of setting the scene?
Well, I think that maybe something that also added is she's thinking about this because they're starting to see their walls crumble a little. They've created these structures. She's sheltered from this outside world by a very protective father and a community who's holding her. But it's this idea that, you know, she's alone in this planning as well, and she's seeing the cracks in the walls, and no one else is really acknowledging those cracks. So sort of understanding the individual aspect of it as well, and seeing forward for her community too, when those walls come down.
Yeah. Yes.
I think the holding on to the nostalgia of we can be better again, like the older community is stuck in that mantra that everything we can come back, and we'll come back, things will be better, and we just survive. And I think that was, the bigger, like, insulator or creator, that anxiety that she saw, was that no one was, like, accepting of what is going on. And they lived like that past glory of what was.
Yeah, and there's a line. Actually, do you mind flipping ahead a few slides? Because that you're mentioning a line. So her father says to her, "That's all anybody can do right now: live, hold out, survive. I don't know whether good times are coming back again, but I know that won't matter if we don't survive these times." And then Lauren, the daughter, hears that and she says, "It's not enough to just survive. That's not enough. Like, we have to dream something bigger and more hopeful into being." And she's inherited this sort of the survivor and this the survival instinct from her father, but she's also transferred that into something more dreamy and ambitious. So yeah, I think that's a really important part to add to this sort of the ambiance of this book.
Yeah, before we share like what Lauren puts on her own list, did anyone else want to share a little bit more about what they put on their list? Yeah.
Binoculars, hunting knife, a fire kindle kit, so like backpack. So it's just like this thing that always you can light, whether the wood is damp, it can still catch. Dehydrated fruit, dehydrated meat, compass, flashlight, multi-purpose jacket. So you can trap water, you can trap fish, rope, and water testing strip. So
Ooh.
if you find yourself in a situation you don't know the quality of water, you can test it. So
Cool. I like the idea of this metal rod, and the multi-purpose jacket that catches fish and holds water. And let's make these things. I mean, that's actually. I mean, a lot of the design work I do, I start with a condition, and then I design out for it as simply as I can in a way that does as much as possible with one really simple thing. When you're imagining this list, are you imagining you're going to be alone?
me, nah, I'm in a community.
Yeah. How about, does someone else want to share their list? Does someone have something dramatically different on their list than has been read? That you can just read that one item. Something that you feel like is really important to tell this group of people to think about if they're making a pack? Yeah. Layers.
Yeah, I was like, oh yeah, I need the pair of leggings, the track pants, the baggy jeans, the boots, my orthopedic shoes, the like tight undershirt, the like sleep shirt, like something warm, and then like a jacket that like can come off. And I'm sort of just like wearing all of it. I get cold, so I'm just like picturing this.
Yeah, we've noticed your sock shoe combo, and so we understand you're gonna bring the fashion to the community. We need you.
We need to look good in the apocalypse.
We need to look good in the apocalypse. I mean, that's another interesting thing about a lot of these movies is the aesthetic of the clothing, and I mean, of these worlds that people build, like how we visualize what that looks like. Like suddenly, everyone has these like new wardrobes that are like leather and fur, and everyone's hair is has like bits of animal things, and it's just like I mean, or it depends which world you're in, but or you're wearing a suit that traps all your water and retains it. Yeah, Rick Owens aesthetic. Yeah. Does anyone else want to add before we reveal what Lauren? Yeah. Yeah. We need to think about how we're holding it. I like the idea of wearing it, and like I love pockets, and so I can imagine that that you're wearing a lot of it, so it's dispersed. And one of the things that they're really worried about is being robbed, because you have all this stuff centralized, and it's like those are the goodies. That's a treasure trove if you're hungry or cold or need your metal rod. Or I keep returning to that because I'm like trying to imagine it, and I love it. But yeah, we can show you what Lauren packs. Maybe everyone can move back just a little so we can broaden the circle too. Okay, so Lauren says, I packed matches, a full change of, I'll wait for it. Thank you. Cool. For those of you who just came in, we're talking about what goes in the survival pack depending on what your future that you're imagining is. And maybe some people aren't imagining apocalypses. Maybe some people are imagining having like a very nice, easy life without needing to be prepared for something dramatic. But Lauren Alamina knows in this book. So she says, I packed matches, a full change of clothing, including shoes in case I have to get up at night and run. Comb, soap, toothbrush and toothpaste, tampons, toilet paper, bandages, pins, needles, and thread. Alcohol, aspirin, a couple of spoons and forks, a can opener, my pocket knife, packets of acorn flour, dried fruit, roasted nuts, and edible seeds, dried milk, a little sugar and salt, my survival notes, several plastic storage bags, large and small, a lot of plantable raw seed, my journal, my Earthseed notebook, and lengths of clothesline. I stowed all this in a pair of old pillowcases. So what I noticed when people were reading their lists is that there weren't, no one said seeds, even though we just talked about seeds. And I'm interested in that, but also you should pack seeds, definitely, because you're gonna need to eat in anywhere you are. Any future, you'll need food. And part of what she packs are her, some food items that are edible as is, but her survival notes. And so she's been researching, she's been reading all these old books to learn about the plants and the resources that she can use as she's traveling through the Northwest. And so she also has the ability to forage, but if you don't know how to forage, then you are gonna have to rely on others, or you're gonna have to do a lot of trial and error. So that's also another way to think about how do you prepare, not just with the things that you have, but the things that you do in advance. So this is actually a question from the book itself. They have reading questions, which are really good and really thoughtful, sort of to read after or as you're reading anyhow. But the best friend of the main character is upset that Lauren is reading these books, and she tells on her. And it feels like a real betrayal. And this question that they pose in the book is, why does Joe react so negatively to Lauren's concerns about being better prepared as a community and as individuals to face crisis? Do you think that Lauren's ideas, including community night watches, learning to fend for themselves in the wild, studying local wild plant life to see if it can be used for food, are excessively paranoid? Lauren's father has pointed out that the community as a whole has trouble thinking far ahead and into such sensitive areas. Do you see ways in which people in today's America are equally unable to think ahead? So anyone can answer. And actually, I think if we need to pass this mic? Yeah, we have it. Oh, okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. So I have a bad habit of anytime someone says they're from Miami, I'm like, how are you doing? Because we know of the threat of sea level rise, and just having taken work trips there and chatting with people there seems to be this sense of like, oh, like, don't think about that. Like, we're enjoying things today. We're in the present. Like, people don't want to be bothered by the negativity of it. So yeah, I see many ways in which people, in the same way people don't like thinking about death. It's like some things are inevitable. We know these things will happen, but there's like a mental block for thinking about it today because it's unpleasant. So I do see ways in which people think about that or think like that now.
Yeah, I think I hadn't really thought about it before, but now, like, when we were talking about our survival packs and all of us, I think we're, like, creating them for being on the move, whereas there's also, like, a whole other group of people that are, like, bunkerizing, and I think, actually, there is a lot of kind of, like, negative sentiment around, like, these bunkers, and, like, obviously because it addresses a certain class of people who, like, can't afford to create these bunkers in the first place, but I think maybe that relates to the feeling that Joe had in that moment of like, oh, you're just thinking for yourself. Maybe you're not like, you're not trusting the community system that we've built here. But yeah, I think that's kind of like the first part to more like Joe's reaction. But yeah, then obviously I think infrastructurally there's a lot of things that we're not doing looking ahead.
That's it. I think that reading is super interesting to see it as Joe resisting the sort of individual element of it rather than it being like, I'm sharing with you so that you can also be prepared. It's sort of like, I'm preparing because I'm not being cared for. And I didn't read it that way either until you said that, and I feel that, and I think that that's part of it for sure. I love that.
I'm from Miami, by the way, so. But yeah, that to that point, yeah. I think we adapt survival adaptations. So being from Miami, you're used to flooding, so we know how to swim. And being from Haiti, you deal with natural disasters, so you know. But in this context, I think what Lauren's father said to her, I think stood out to me when she was like, when you told Joe you should have taught her. Because I think fear is an easy thing to incite, especially because Joe's young and they already have a sense of what the world is and they hear from their elders what the world was. So like her just coming with these like hardcore facts of like, yo, we need to be ready, scared her. And I think teaching was the thing that she should have did, like the father suggested. But then again, when we talk about what do we see in today's world, I think it's obvious that a lot of that first part of how we are so nostalgically remembering what we were and what we can be great once again and not paying attention to how we should adapt and evolve and like try new practices is what fills that paranoia that Lauren has, because she sees it in the community that she's in, that they are so trapped in old thinking and hopefulness and they cannot move forward. And I think that's a parallel that we share right now.
Yeah, and the passage that you're talking about with the conversation with her dad, and she's like, you should tell everybody to make a go bag. And he's like, it's not worth scaring people if it doesn't happen. It's worse to create anxiety over something that they're anticipating than for people to react in the moment. And that passage really sticks out to me as this sort of way that people think about the climate changes that we're all witnessing, maybe experiencing ourselves in larger and smaller ways, and sort of the divide in the sort of like act now or act then energy. Does anyone else have a response? Go ahead.
I was thinking, you said earlier about crumbling infrastructure, and that just kind of triggered in my brain of thinking about specifically watching everyone currently having been denying climate change over and over and over again, and watching like the country literally getting pummeled in the South right now with things that are undeniable, and watching just seeing so much physical infrastructure of everyone has been so specifically focused on the present and creating the present to be the past and blind to the future, that even in like American infrastructure and how things have been like built in the last 100 years, nothing has been thought of for the future. And especially even if there was no climate change, like the infrastructure wasn't thought of long term. And it's now just like all these things are coming in and everything is so much more vulnerable than it even could be. And it's just a twofold of evidence of things coming in, also making things kind of more undeniable to everyone around them.
Does anyone else have something to add? Does anyone experience this in their own lives, where they are the ones who are talking about a future, trying to get people prepared, trying to communicate an anxiety or a sort of a passion, maybe, if you don't communicate it through anxiety? I don't like to communicate through anxiety. I like to communicate through inviting people into conversation, and also a lot of joy. And we have to celebrate too, but bring people into the conversations in ways that are accessible. But I personally definitely feel like there's moments of resistance and moments where I feel like I have to be persuasive in order to bring people into the reality that I think is inevitable, or try to bring them to a reality that we're going to have to act on if we want to have happen. Does anyone have moments like that?
It's kind of what we were discussing, and I really love that you brought up kind of the conversation that follows, which is about like how you have, or like how you should approach these subjects. And I think some of the loud voices on social media and in media on kind of paying attention to climate change are utilizing these tactics that are like, I don't know if like the term like eco-terrorism is like, but it's become like a whole movement among, you know, people who really care for the environment, but is it really the right tactic? I think it's really important to like keep reminding ourselves of like approaching these conversations more gently and in a more like constructive manner, and like learning, like the idea of like learning about plants and like holding a class to teach people about plants rather than telling people to create a go bag.
For me, I think growing up in the inner city and being like curious to be like a Boy Scout and a Cub Scout, and then keeping that energy into my adult life, and then anytime, you know, moving to a city like New York and then like meeting city folk that don't really hike or don't know outside or don't understand hunting or don't understand the sustainability of like, you know, honorable kills, and like trying to really retranslate this very negative stigma of, you know, being a country person and growing up in the country, because I went to school in South Carolina, so I experienced a lot of country living. So bringing that energy and like that fun was a way for me to kind of get people comfortable with this idea of what can be, based off of me reading this book when I read it. And it kind of sparked that like, oh, okay, we got to get back to outside and get back to like old thinking, like some of the ancestry thinking, and understanding that there was a knowledge and a history and a survival that we lost through modernization, and trying to like in a very thoughtful way like communicate that and say, hey, we should pay homage to some of traditional understanding. It's a traditional living. So that's how I try to bring it about, because I kind of felt this energy coming.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I think for me, what I've been thinking about, I guess less of an apocalyptic and more thinking of climate change, is like how we sort of have to. No, okay. So I kind of been thinking when thinking of climate change, and I just been thinking about how we sort of, and how I've been seeing this romanticization of nature, and how nature is this way for humans to escape. And you know, we built, not we, but some designers have built like the way that they built like state parks, and how it's built for humans, and human in nature is this romanticness. And I've been thinking and trying to tell people, like, we have no longer the time to romanticize nature as a background scenario for human activities. And by being that is decentralizing ourselves in this like whole, just about like, hey, like climate change is affecting us, but like decentralizing us and centralizing like the impact of everything that's beyond human, and flattening the human hierarchy in climate change as being just us, but like how it's affect everything because of the ecosystem we live in. And sort of like even air, like when I think of bombings, like the invisible air that sort of happens with that, and how we are in a trap atmosphere, and like how like that travels, and like how if you pray into water, like it travels, like it's not like just like staying in like the Hudson River, like, you know, it's like going to different places, like, you know what I mean? So this romanticizing of nature just being is no, like to me, like when I try to communicate climate change to people in not in an anxious way, but to like remove just yourself as a human, but like see the broader picture, because we no longer have the time to like just view it as like this escape, you know what I mean? And I think that's what I think, I don't know. That's what I think.
Yeah. Yes, I'm with you. I mean, another thing that's interesting is nobody packed something for another creature, you did? Oh yeah, no.
But then I was like, oh my God, like if I see a cat, like the cat is like teaching, like, I don't know. Like I was like, I got the metal can, I don't know. I was like, I'll put something out for you. Like we're gonna hang out. Like, I don't know. I thought about that. I was like, but then I'm like, their instincts are a lot different, but then I've been thinking about the conditioning too of certain animals being conditioned in certain places through human cares, like zoos and stuff like that. Like what happens to them when like we no longer care for them and they're sort of like, you know, like.
I mean, in the book, the dogs are hungry and humans are edible. And no longer do you have these relationships where you're, good boy. And it's like the dog is a creature who needs to survive. And people are not feeding the dogs because they can't feed themselves. And I mean, this is something that happens all over the world now. But it's interesting to think about how do you prepare for feeding not just us, but feeding the creatures, the animals. How do you say, okay, if I'm going to plant an acorn tree that an oak tree that I'm then going to get acorn flour from, that I'm then going to make into, pancakes and bread and all of that. How do I make sure there's enough so that the squirrels can eat and whatever other creatures who are going to eat these, nuts and seeds, enough for them to survive too, because or else they're going to just eat it up. And you need to co-inhabit these spaces. So I really agree with you. And it's definitely like a lot of these models are anthropocentric, but the animals are here with us, and not just the animals, it's the air, the water, the soil has a huge memory of how we've behaved, and a lot of the soil is not going to nourish us at this point, even if we have access to it. Yeah, is there anything else that someone wants to add in relation to this conversation? Yeah.
Reading after talking about like the conversation of her and her dad saying it's her speaking and teaching, he goes on to talk about like it's interesting that you gave your book to your friend to like try to show her and teach her through that. Like, why don't you maybe think about teaching kindergartners? And then he goes on to talk about how in the community, like all the different classes that are happening. And I think that just kind of, he was setting up a model maybe of that she kind of goes on to in the future set up of none of this is for ourselves. How can we all be like learning things to do for everyone else and like be creating such a more community-based effort and doing it through teaching to like decentralize one another is a really interesting concept, and I think can maybe,
Yeah, I think that it's something that I was also thinking about too. Like you were talking, I think Demetrius was talking earlier about the old guard versus the new guard, but really with her father, he's not necessarily shutting her down. He's showing her a different way. And I think that's something that is interesting. Maybe a question I can pose back to you guys is when you think about survival, you have these ideas around survival that aren't in a vacuum. You've come from somewhere. They came from maybe your family or your community. So I think I'm wondering what sort of survival tactics maybe you've been taught throughout your life. I think when I was young, I grew up in California, so earthquakes obviously are really present. So from a young age, I was always making the earthquake packs that they use as their model. And those earthquake packs are just like Pringles and like bottled water. I don't think I was going to be surviving for more than 4 hours, really. But I'm curious to hear about like what grounds everyone's individual ideas of why or how survival looks like. If anyone would like to share.
That makes me think of like, I'm Colombian, and like in my country, I feel like people like they actually like save like it's like leftover foods, and like it's like you really like take care of like the leftovers, and it's like okay, because maybe tomorrow here we have something to eat as well. And I just feel like that might be a survival thing that I have been taught since, like also with like energy, it's like turning out the lights and like saving the water, it's like all these things like, and I compare a lot like to, I don't know, like maybe like with my roommates that they come from like a different background and like different countries, and it's like there's like this like it's like if one of them they just assume like okay it's water, it's just water, it's like 'cause then sometimes I'm like, hey, can you please like close the shower, is that how you say it, like close the shower, like if you're just don't let run water. And it really like it's like, and it's like, it's just water. And it's like, yes, but it's like, it's something that we wouldn't have in a very near future. So I just feel like, yeah, like being aware of that is like a survival thing, or I want to think that way, because, like, because, or, and also like swimming will be like, because I feel like we're going to be underwater. Um, um, I need to learn how to like kayak or something, because like I feel like that'll be the transportation in the future. But yeah.
Yeah, it's like the way you think about resources, essentially.
Right.
From the water, I think swimming, I can project my voice. Swimming is something that we've learned since I was swimming since I was 3 years old. So like being a strong swimmer, being from Miami, growing up in Haiti, that was our thing. Being like good hikers, like really like climbing, like we always learn how to climb. So climbing is something that I think is something that I'm always mindful about and trying to always like exercise and get my friends to be comfortable with doing, like conquering fear of heights, which I know is not an easy thing, but you think about survival and you might have to maneuver and get over something, get through something. So like those are like the two big things that I think growing up outside, camping, hiking, swimming, climbing, free climbing, no rope, going up 15, 20 feet, not being afraid to fall or fall, and like be comfortable with pain. I think modern life has made us a little bit soft, so the idea of discomfort is a little bit interesting to me. So like just being rough and tough and falling was something I grew up with that I think centers my survival skill.
Yeah, sorry, in a very different direction, because I think I'm the opposite, where he says, like, I don't have a lot of survival skills, and something that's coming up a lot in this conversation, I think, is like the first 8 chapters of this book does like a really great job of creating like a clear picture of mutual aid. And I think, like, yeah, that moment, that teachable moment where, Lauren's dad is like, why didn't you share your knowledge, and how can you rely on the other people around you? And throughout the book, even though I feel like Lauren as a character is constantly noticing the tension that exists within her community, like, it's so clear how much they rely on mutual aid and that they fear losing that. And so as someone who like is from like New York and doesn't have maybe like the most robust like outdoor skills, like the only way I imagine my survival is through mutual aid. And I think that's something that's so like relevant right now, like with everything in the world as well.
Oh, sorry. Hi, thank you. Yeah, I was just wondering, here in the Northeast, what would we eat in the winter? And I think there wouldn't be that many plants around, but we could eat rabbits and squirrels, deer and turkeys. And for those of us who don't eat a lot of meat, it might be a real adjustment anyway. And we'd have to learn how to hunt and fish. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, most of us are probably city dwellers. So even if you have those skills, or you've inherited some understanding of those skills, you might be hunting something that you wouldn't have imagined eating, or you might not be practicing those skills or the preparation of these animals regularly. And so I imagine for myself personally, there'll be a lot of trial and error. I do not eat meat, and so that would be a big adjustment. And yeah, I haven't eaten it since I was 5, so I'm like, I don't even, maybe it would kill me. Who knows? Like, it might be my demise to try to survive through those types of means of survival. Does someone else have something to add about maybe what they inherited in terms of their capacity or their understanding of survival?
But like, I guess reading people's emotions, like being able to like read facial expressions for me has been very important, especially as someone who does present as like female. It's like, I feel like, I don't know, I've gotten a lot of like negative, like, I don't know, like reactions from people. When I like don't like, I don't know, like it's like a feedback loop almost, but like I feel like I try to like listen in conversation and like respond, as opposed to like I don't know if that makes too much sense, but I feel like this book was very overwhelming for me at times because it's like she's just feeling so many things. So sometimes it's hard for me to even pick up on the mutual aid stuff because I'm like so